The Mario Rosenstock Podcast with On Ice, Ireland's premium ice skating experience, where winter memories are made. Visit onice.ie.
GoLoud. Sounds better with us.
Coming up on this episode of the Mario Rosenstock Podcast.
I'm going to be in RTE from 9:30 in the evening until 3:30 in the morning.
Oh, is that right?
And then I'll be back in for Morning Island at 6 a.m. And it's tough, but Mario, the fact is, I love it. The description, pig and shit, wouldn't be too far off the mark.
I know.
I absolutely love it.
Like so many of you out there, I have developed an almost unhealthy interest in American politics over the last, 9 years or so. And these days we have instant access to every interview, every clip, every soundbite. And we know that the outcome of this election could have real tangible effects, not only globally, but also locally here in Ireland. The US election is upon us, and I know that we are interested in it because I see the popularity myself firsthand of items like the US politics slot on The Last Word with Matt Cooper, featuring Marion McKeown and Cal Thomas. We know because of the weekly missives from the Hill columnist Niall Stanage on Eamon Dunphy's excellent podcast, The Stand. We know because of Maureen Dowd's widely read column in the Irish Times. Anything to do with America, we are, golloping up here in Ireland. And today my guest is one of the most familiar voices and faces indeed on US politics in Ireland. Larry Donnelly is not only one of the best and shrewdest commentators out there, but he also has a fascinating backstory himself, coming as he does from an Irish Bostonian family. His uncle was Brian Donnelly, of the Donnelly Visas fame. Remember that? The Donnelly Visas in the 80s? And I think we're going to find Larry's story and his takes indeed on this US election fascinating.
And it was the first time I'd ever left Boston that I wasn't dying to go back. I loved Ireland that much, and it wasn't just the party, it wasn't just the crack. There was a very deep connection and a feeling that I was finally at home. People here give out about paying a couple of $1,000 a year. I can tell you now that the sticker price for 1 year for my undergraduate alma mater is now $83,500 for 1 year. It's gotten harder and harder to move up. Not enough attention is focused in on what I would call the ruthlessly transactional Trump voter. That is, the person who looks at Donald Trump and says, I don't like him, I wouldn't let my daughter anywhere near him, but he cut my taxes, or he overturned Roe versus Wade, and as a result, I will support him.
Larry Donnelly coming up very soon. But first, it's great to be back. Great to be back for a new season of the Mario Rosenstock Podcast. And thanks to all of you for all your emails and your social media messages saying, are you ever coming back? How long is this break lasting? Well, we're back, and I'm back, and I'm delighted to be back. And I got back to nearly all of you who got in touch with me, and thanks a million for that. And we're back with a bang with a brand new sponsor, On Ice, Ireland's premier ice skating experience. We're just into November. People are starting to turn their attention to Christmas, festive fun, fresh, chilly, brisk evenings. So On Ice are bringing back the magic of ice skating nationwide this festive season. They're everywhere. They're in Dublin, Dundrum and Swords. They're down in Cork in the Marion Market, as well as Limerick and Galway. And even my hometown of Waterford. What do you think you're doing, boy? Ice skating. Who do you think you are, boy? Go way out of that, boy. It's a long way that we've come in Waterford from ice skating, I'll tell you. It's the perfect time of year to do it, to try it. You don't have to be Torval and Dean. Just give it a bash. It's great fun. And it's great exercise as well. And the perfect time of year to get your family involved. Perfect festive family fun, entertainment for all the family. And obviously, because they're my sponsor, I'm obviously going to be trying it as well. So get your tickets now and go on onice.ie. They're Limerick, Galway, Waterford, Cork and Dublin. Get your skates on, boy. That's just a tagline I came up from the top of my head. Genius, isn't it? So that's it. Thanks a million to On Ice, and they'll be sponsoring us for the next few months, all through this winter season. So thanks, guys. Okay, Larry Donnelly on the way. But because it's politics and American politics, we had a huge number of calls to the Mario Rosenstock podcast voicemail. Hi, you've reached the Mario Rosenstock podcast. Please leave a message.
Mario, Matt Cooper here. Message for Larry Donnelly. Larry, you never offered to talk to me about your interesting backstory in Boston, or your life story, or the whole Brian Donnelly visas thing. I left you a few messages there last Saturday. I never heard back from you. I regard this as a personal slight. Goodbye.
Yes, Mario, this is President Michael D. Higgins. Wonderful to see the podcast back. As a former college colleague of Larry Donnelly in University in Galway, I am very much looking forward to hearing today's discussion, and especially hearing him stick it to that wanker Trump.
Michael T.
Sorry.
Stop it.
Sorry, I couldn't help myself.
Get off the phone.
Larry is like me, of course. He doesn't get overly involved.
Get off the phone.
In outside his realm of interest.
Get off the phone now.
This is President Donald J. Trump. Larry the Loser Donnelly is fake news. He's a fake pundit who got kicked out of the United States like a dog. He's a dog. No credibility. He's a nasty, vicious, horrible guy. Never liked him, the Loser Donnelly dog. Good luck.
Folks, this is President Joe Biden. Well, Larry Donnelly's a great guy. And by the way, folks, look, let's get real here. And guess what? Anybody who calls Larry Donnelly a loser is garbage, folks. Garbage, folks. Larry Donnelly, great guy.
So, Larry, great to have you on the Mario Rosenstock podcast. And I just want to ask you about your accent, because we kind of know that accent. It's a fantastic accent. And you don't hear much of it on Irish radio.
No, and thanks for having me. I suppose I'm from Boston, so the accent comes with the territory. The one thing that's kind of interesting, I suppose, is that when I go home, my friends, their accents aren't as strong as mine, even though I'm the one who's lived away. And a big part of it, my brother always says to me, he's like, I was going away giving presentations places, and they just start laughing at me before they even heard, the content of what I said. And so they all kind of work to modify their accents. So I come home and they accuse me of having this fake accent. And I say, guys, I still talk like we did when we were 15, 16 years old. You're the ones who have changed. So it's kind of funny in a way that here I am 3,000 miles away, still speaking the way I always did. But there are parallels for that with Irish immigrants. There's lots of people who may have left, home and gone somewhere else, and they come back and people say to them, geez, your accent is as strong as it ever was. And maybe subliminally, it's part of an identity that I desperately want to maintain. I certainly don't do it on purpose, but it's stayed with me.
Yeah. If you were coaching me in it, I think the key word is kind of ca, isn't it? Car and pot.
Well, yeah, the way you're saying the ca, it's ca. It's more rounded than that. It's
the pad of the
like
ca.
The R is coming in, but the R is just pronounced differently. So it's not just ca like C-A, it's C-A-H. So it's ca.
Ca, yeah. And Good Will Hunting, I think, there's a good version of the accents. But Matt Damon and Bill and Ben Affleck.
Yeah, well, the boys are from Cambridge, so they didn't have to work that hard. Just like lots of other people, they were in the acting business, so they lost their accents, but they wouldn't have had to work too hard to go back to what they grew up with.
Yeah, it's a great accent. And of course, it always brings to mind the Kennedy family and of course their kind of preeminent role in American politics, and John and Bobby and Ted as well.
Yeah, absolutely. The Kennedys were the figures. I mean, they were huge figures in my upbringing. They were the political family. Being from a political family myself, it was funny because you'd always have this thing where there were the Kennedys, and then there were what were called the Kmart Kennedys. That is the cheap imitations of those. And I suppose my family would have fallen into those lines. And it was an interesting environment because a lot of the Boston Irish would have felt that the Kennedys kind of, in a way, got too big for their britches. That old Irish trait of begrudgery, I think, crept in at some stage. But the Kennedys became very quickly national figures. And a lot of people in Boston would have felt like they lost touch with the people on the ground. They lost touch with the Boston Irish. And there were certain issues over the years where that came to the fore, perhaps most specifically in forced busing to integrate the public school system in the city of Boston, which Senator Kennedy, as a national liberal left-wing figure, was broadly supportive of, but Irish Americans opposed very, very strongly, as did political leaders, for Irish American political leaders in the Boston area. So there would have been a distance that sprung up between the Kennedy family and the Boston Irish over time. So, of course, when JFK was the nominee for president, of course, there was an immense amount of pride and solidarity and all that sort of thing, even though, the Kennedys had moved on. They were a different class, different socioeconomic class to most of the Boston Irish. There was huge solidarity at that moment. I think it waned over the years, and I think probably the busing issue, which is a huge issue in Boston in the 1970s, probably precipitated a lot of that.
Explain that to me. Am I hearing you right that the Kennedys themselves, or maybe John Kennedy, would have been more liberal than the vast majority of the Irish Bostonians?
Yeah, I think that's true. I don't think President Kennedy himself would have been much more to the left of the Boston Irish, but maybe he would have pivoted that way if he hadn't had the tragic assassination. But his brother Bobby and his brother Ted certainly pivoted more to the left as the years went by, and that was in keeping with the trajectory of their Democratic Party. Whereas a lot of the Boston Irish would have stayed, centrist or even more conservative, and that was shaped in many respects by their adherence to what was, for them and including for my family, the central institution in our lives, which is the Roman Catholic Church.
Absolutely. I mean, we would have read about this before, the idea that, like, when you were an Irish immigrant coming to America in the 1850s, 60s and onwards, that you would have been discriminated against by the people who were already there. And then in turn, as an Irish man or woman, you would have settled into your tribal system, and you would have yourself then discriminated against the Italians that came after you. And then the Italians themselves would have discriminated against the Latinos or the Mexicans that would have come after them. It's kind of a hierarchical thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, Boston politics, things have changed so much today. It's not recognizable, at least to old fossils like me. But back in the day, when my family were making their way in politics in the city of Boston, it was fiercely tribal and fiercely ethnic, and all the things that you describe. And of course, a large part of what my great uncles who first were involved in politics, what they would have come up against was the WASP establishment, the people who, as we'd say in Boston, they got off the Mayflower, and they'd been the governing, they'd controlled the city of Boston for many, many years. And the Irish, at least in the city of Boston, slowly outnumbered them and came to power. And they came to political power in a way that no other ethnic group did. And look, now it's sort of things are, history progresses. And now a lot of the Irish have moved out of the city of Boston itself. And now there are different ethnic groups who are taking control, and that's the way it's always been in Boston.
Does Boston still see itself as have very close ties with Ireland?
Oh, no question about it. But the city itself, the old ethnic neighborhoods that listeners might be familiar with, indeed may have lived in or had family there, but places like South Boston and Dorchester and Charlestown, they're gradually being that identity is gradually being eroded. They've been gentrified. A lot of the people have moved out to the suburbs. A lot of the older people could get an awful lot of money for their houses that they bought for half nothing and have moved down to Florida, or indeed not a small amount have moved here to Ireland. So that the city has changed a great deal.
Mm-hmm. And Larry, you came from America to live in Ireland. Your forefathers had gone from Ireland to America, and then you decided to return. Why?
Yeah, and the famous quote, and I've said it before and I'll keep saying it, was that my father, who thought it was a good move for me for a whole host of reasons, which I'll do a very quick surface sketch of. He thought it was a great thing for me, but what he always said to me was, your grandmother would be sending the men in white coats for you if she knew that you were moving to Galway. And that was based on everything that she had grown up with hearing, that, thank God we got out of there. But the west of Ireland was a difficult place back in those days. Yeah. There wasn't much opportunity. Conditions weren't great, and the United States offered a beacon. For me, it was a funny thing. All I ever wanted to do when I was younger, or at least what I thought I wanted wanted to do was be a Boston lawyer who dabbled in politics and that sort of thing. And I worked really hard, and I did well academically and all that sort of thing. And I got a job with a firm that I really liked and worked with great people who I learned a huge amount from and really, frankly, loved personally. But being a lawyer, I quickly discovered was not for me. And it's funny, as somebody who now educates, soon-to-be lawyers, law practice wasn't for me. And I hadn't been to Ireland since I was younger because of the cost of education in the United States. My parents couldn't afford it. Frankly, we traveled regularly here when we were younger, but I hadn't been in a number of years. And I came over for a wedding in 2000 to a friend's wedding who's living in Boston, but he was from Galway. And we went, one of my best friends and I, we went and we had the time of our lives at the wedding. And it was the first time I'd ever left Boston that I wasn't dying to go back. I loved Ireland that much. And it wasn't just the party, it wasn't just the crack, etc. It was something, a vibe. A really deep, yes, a really deep connection that I know, again, I'm here long enough to know that some people say, God, that's so twee, another Irish American to our Laura. But there was a very deep connection and a feeling that I was finally at home. And since that wedding, I said, look, I'm not happy in my professional life. What I'd love to do is go over and spend a year or two in Ireland, find myself, so to speak, and then come back with a new sense of purpose as to what I want to do with my life. And after a number of unsuccessful attempts to land work, and we did lots of different things, my friend dropped out of the quest. He was part of it with me, but I kept at it. And I really stumbled into a fellowship for an American lawyer to teach legal research and writing, legal skills, something that the then head of school to whom I'm forever in debt, Professor Jared Quinn. He had been educated, done a lot of his legal education in the U.S. And came back with this idea that we should be doing this in Ireland. We should be teaching kids not just, the theory, but we should be teaching the practical skills. And so he started this fellowship in Galway, and I was lucky enough that he took a chance on me in September of 2001. It was a one-year fellowship. They asked me to stay for a second year. I did the second year. I went back to the U.S. then because I had a girlfriend, because of all sorts of reasons. It didn't work out, but then fortunately they decided to convert the one-year fellowship into a permanent job. And lo and behold, 2004, I managed to get the job, and I'm here ever since.
That's great. And just briefly, actually, what you were quite firm about this. Why did you say it wasn't for you, the legal thing? I mean, people see Boston legal and the dynamic, Suits, if you've ever watched Suits, the swashbuckling lawyers with their $1,000 suits, the adrenaline rushes, the big money, the idea that lawyers in America are so powerful. Because the law in America is so full of detail that lawyers, and in the corporate world, they can change everything. Whether it's a tax loophole or seeing through government regulation or something. So it's a wonderful, exciting, as they portray it on television. What was it about law that wasn't for you?
I'll say two things. And to an extent, I'll play along with my critics. That is that the people I went to law school with, and again was lucky enough to graduate at the top of my class with the crew of people who did very well and went on to great things in law. I'll go along with some of with what they've said to me to my face, and I know they sometimes say behind my back. One was that I just wasn't willing to work as hard as they do. I especially in the early years of law practice in the United States, you are working all day long, and the salaries are high, but the way I would put it is if you actually broke it down by the number of hours you work, you might as well work at Burger King, because that's how hard they work you. And I just, even at a young age, when you're trying to, cut your teeth and all that stuff, I just wasn't willing to do that. And number two, I would probably be delighted to work really hard, and I do work really hard right now because I love what I do. But at the end of the day, I just didn't find it that rewarding. And if you're going to spend that much amount of time on something, you better like it. Yeah. And for me, I just didn't.
And this is something we underestimate or we don't really understand fully about America. Among many things, I think you would probably find. But one of the things is how bloody hard they work, especially in professions. It's so competitive, and education costs so much, and you are in hock for a large part of the rest of your life, that when you do have the privilege of arriving in a firm of accountants or lawyers, they work you to the bone. And I remember hearing like some Americans don't even take any holidays during a year. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? I mean, you might get 1 week leave, but they don't even take it sometimes. Yeah. They work all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, that's absolutely true. And it certainly was true of a lot of my classmates from law school. That's the way they put it. I mean, I remember one young woman who I went to law school with, a phenomenal lawyer, phenomenally talented, and she worked for 3 years. And in that 3 years, and I include Saturday and Sunday in this, in that 3 years, she had taken 5 days off. There were 5 days off in 3 years. She informed her supervising partner at the firm that she was taking a week off because she was getting married. And the supervising partner said that's not a very good move for your career.
Yeah.
And she said, I can't take this anymore. And she walked. And she walked.
And in fact, that's even portrayed on television as well.
Yeah.
The idea that you don't take holidays.
Yeah.
It's extraordinary. And it's something we're not really used to here in Ireland, because when we live in the kind of the comfort of the Western European kind of shell where, holidays are so important, and leave of 4, 5, 6 weeks a year. Yeah. People talking about the 4-day week implemented in Iceland. People talking for 30 years about a 4-day week in France. We live in a different world.
Yeah, and it's one of the things, I mean, as somebody who teaches young people and, sometimes, let's be blunt, sometimes gets irritated with the quirks of Gen Z, or now I think it's called Gen A or something like, or Gen Alpha, whatever the next thing is. The one thing I admire tremendously about them is they're just not going to take that. Whereas we, in the old days, we just said this is what you have to do.
Suck it up.
What I'm finding with the younger people is they're just not going to stand for that. They say, look, and part of it is a very real, glib, but very real, knowledge. I could get hit by a bus tomorrow. Do I want to say I spent my whole life working?
Yeah.
Or do I want to say I saw the world, I lived a full life?
Yeah.
And I think that's a really refreshing attitude.
Yeah. And to be honest with you, and I'll say something, this would be reasonably controversial almost. Part of that refreshing attitude actually is, as far as I can see, propagated through social media platforms, especially Instagram. I mean, your feed is full of how to live a balanced life. Don't live for work alone. Your close ones are the most important to you. It isn't a kill or be killed sort of atmosphere, on that platform. And it's very twee sometimes, and it has, the almost cut and paste quotes. But they are real as well, and they do mean something. And your life is worth something more than just working. And love and friendship and companionship and breathing and meditating and just listening to the rain at night is important.
Yeah, absolutely. I see it through my older guy, my stepson, who I've adopted, who's 25 now, and he works in tech sales and he works hard, but he also has that same balance. And I look back, because that's when I was a young lawyer, sort of trying to figure my way, and how he looks at the world and how I then looked at the world. I say, God, Larry, you're a damn fool. Look, this guy has a much better grip on things. And I think that's one of the very, very good things about the next generation, who, as I say, sometimes I give out about.
They're also better at demonstrable affection, showing affection, putting their arms around each other, giving each other hugs, which in our day, Larry, we weren't. We were a bit too macho for that.
That was a sign of weakness.
Or maybe even worse, we could be gay.
Oh, absolutely.
God almighty. God forbid, Larry.
Absolutely. And I say this, and I not to bring the tenor down, I say this in a way that was, I would argue with you, more true in Boston than it was here. The latent and the patent homophobia that was a feature of our everyday life was really, really sad, and something I have deep regrets for not calling out and being an implicit part of.
Yeah, but people give out about the new generation. In every generation that passes, the previous generation always give out about the new generation. But there is room for hope as well. In what we see in the new generation.
Absolutely. And what I'll say is sometimes, in my job teaching, sometimes we focus in too much on students who have problems for all sorts of different reasons. But then, you look at some of these young people who are absolutely amazing, and that has to give you hope.
Okay. And how ironic that you reverse emigrated to Ireland, considering your uncle, Brian Donnelly, was the man who, was the beginning of this, started the Donnelly visas.
Yeah.
The Donnelly visas, of course, for those who don't know it, they're famous in Ireland in the 1980s, especially the dreaded dark Middle Ages of the 1980s, when Irish people were seeking the valve of emigration to get out of this 15% unemployment that we had in Ireland. And the Donnelly visas, 1.5 million, were one of the main ways we got out of the country legally to get a green card in America, and that was your uncle.
That's right, yeah, my father's brother. And I think it is important because young people today wouldn't have any sense of this at all. But I recall one of my own cousins from Galway saying to me that, he graduated from, as it then was, University College Galway. And the president, and this is no bad remark on the president, but because I think he was probably portraying reality, was saying that, we hope we've educated you well and trained you well for your life in London or Boston. And that was a very, very sad message to bring home. But that's the way it was then. There simply wasn't the opportunity. And that's what motivated my Uncle Brian to start the Donnelly visa. And he always used to tell the story. He passed away last year, but he always used to tell the story of what pivoted him was 2 elderly Irish immigrants showed up at one of his constituency offices one day. And they were there in, as he said, it was so hot out. And there they were in suits, etc. And, they were obviously taking this very seriously. And they waited for hours to see him. And he brought them in. And they told him, they fully brought him up to date with everything that was going on in terms of both people who were here looking for something and not having anything, and people who were living in the shadows of America. And Brian then was prompted to act. Of course, his, our own family connections and love for Ireland was one motivator, but the other motivator was, politically speaking, it worked for him because the congressional district he represented, the then 11th congressional district in Massachusetts, was the most Irish congressional district in the United States, in the sense that it had both the highest percentage of people who identified as Irish American, but also the highest number of Irish-born people living there. So there were dual, motivations for it. But I think ultimately his heart was in it because of his own family's experience, our family's experience. And look, nothing makes me gladder when to this day I have people coming up to me saying to me how much of a difference the Donnelly visa made for them, whether they stayed here, whether they stayed in the United States. It's extraordinary, and I think it's a truly remarkable legacy, one which he never dwelt on, one which he never sold. He was not a man for the limelight, but one of which my family is immensely proud.
And it is a time back in the 80s when, even our government ministers like Brian Lenihan were saying there simply isn't enough room on the island for all of us and there aren't enough jobs. So, we are preparing each other for emigration, and emigration was seen as just natural, whereas now it's very much seen as an option rather than a necessity.
Yeah, I mean that's again. I wrote a book a couple of years ago, and my uncle spoke to me. Was kind enough to speak to me at length about that, and he said the best thing that I can say today about Ireland is that you don't need a Donnelly visa. You don't need that stuff anymore. There's enough opportunity at home. Now, of course, Irish people go abroad. They go and live elsewhere. A lot of them want to go and live and work in the United States. They can't do so, which I think is a damn shame because of how much they've contributed to the United States. So they still have itchy feet, but a lot of them do obviously come home, and there is ample opportunity at home. Of course, there are growing pains. Of course, the housing issue is a very, very real problem. But things have changed dramatically in the past 40 years, and that's all to the good.
And America has changed dramatically in the last 30 to 40 years since you were there. Do you think since, let's say, the mid to early 90s, early to mid 90s to now, do you think America has changed a lot in that time?
Yeah, it has in a big way, and I notice it because my friends, they're there every day, and I think when you're in the middle of something, you don't really see how drastic the change is. It's kind of around you every day, so you're kind of rolling with the punches all the time. What I see as the biggest thing is the tremendous income inequality and the disparity between the haves and the have-nots. And I think that's been amplified in a context of rapid inflation. That inflation has slowed lately, but certainly in the past 10 years, the costs of goods and services, the costs of housing, et cetera, has exploded. And it is fine if you're among the cadre of people who are doing well. And indeed, their salaries have gone up. They're doing, extremely well. But it used to be that, for instance, when I was growing up, in the neighborhood I grew up in, one salary, most of our mothers stayed home and looked after us. We had one father working. The father, typically wasn't making a huge salary, but they could afford to, to raise us, to send us to parochial schools, as most of them did, as most of us went to, and then on to college. In many instances, they could do so without us, assuming mountain loads of debt, et cetera. Nowadays, that is gone. Nowadays, I look at my neighborhood and literally I don't think you could get a shack there for less than $1 million. That's how things have changed so drastically.
So they have the same problem as here.
They do, absolutely, and it's changed drastically in a short space of time. And this is the nub of the issue. If you're doing well, that's okay. But if you aren't doing well, if you are struggling, if you are working in the service industry or whatever it might be, if you don't have a very high salary, I don't know how you do it. I just don't know how you do it. And people seek to explain the rise of Trump and all this other stuff. And, it is because, in my view, and it gives me no pleasure to say this, in my view, the model of America is unfortunately broken. It is, whether it can be retrieved or not, I'm not so sure. I don't know. But it certainly bears all the hallmarks of late-stage capitalism.
It does, and possibly, well, we can go on to this because now you're stuck into it, but possibly like Rome, the end of the Republic, the end of the experiment, the end of this idea, because they are the progenitors of the whole thing. This massive experiment in democracy stroke extreme capitalism and free marketeering may be coming to a head.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm congenitally, disposed to optimism, and I can't see the U.S. disintegrating because there are so many people who I think are working to make it better. And I should say, even people I agree or disagree with, I think a lot of them start from a good place. They want to change. They see problems and they do want to change things. Whether they can get past some of the more malevolent forces that skew the other direction, that's an open question. But one of the things I think doesn't get near enough attention, I think you adverted to it a couple of minutes ago, Mario, one of the things obviously around the world in terms of mobility and class mobility and success is education. Education is the passport to that. And when you look at the staggering costs of education in the United States, I mean, people here give out about paying a couple of $1,000 a year. I can tell you now that the sticker price, now I know they say they give financial aid, and they do, and it's generous, etc., but the sticker price for 1 year for my undergraduate alma mater is now $83,500 for 1 year. And how then kids from working class, disadvantaged backgrounds, etc., how then they can, advance. And that was always the idea. America's not a caste system. You could always move up, etc. It's gotten harder and harder to move up. One
of the things that annoys me about Americans' coverage of themselves is there what I might term their kind of, rosy-eyed patriotism. I mean, they're often found saying, every day you will hear Americans on TV saying, that's why we're the greatest country in the world, because we can argue with each other. We can have elections. Unlike who? Unlike who? What? France? Germany? Sweden? Ireland? The UK? Every other country, democratic country in the world has the same thing. That's why we're the greatest country in the world, because we have all these great education facilities. What, at $83,000 a pop? We charge nothing to go to college. What are you talking about? That's why we're the greatest country in the world. Where are they getting this from? That's a famous speech by Jeff Daniels in the thing. We're not the greatest country in the world. We're 17th in literacy. We're 19th in mathematics. We're this and that and the other. America has fallen behind in many, many metrics, Larry. Would you not agree?
Yeah, it gives me no pleasure to agree, but I think you're I think you're right, and I think that the one thing living away for as long as I have has given me is a sense of just how nonsensical this mantra that we are the land of opportunity, we are the country that is greatest at everything, et cetera, et cetera. It's given me a good bit of distance from that. And two things I'd say. First is the civic religion in America inculcates that stuff in you from a very, very young age. And I don't think there's anything wrong necessarily with patriotism or thinking America is a good place, because I still do think America is a good place. But I think it has to be tempered by the realities that you've just spoken about. And I think what is almost an intrinsic aversion to what's done in Western Europe. So, for instance, an awful lot of Americans would say, you're all socialists there anyway, as if this is a terrible thing. And it's just pure nonsense. But again, it's because that's part of what the civic religion teaches. Now, the one thing I will say in defense of America, and it was put to me best by an immigrant from the Dominican Republic who my wife and we were going into town and we got into his Uber. And he was, as you say, working every hour that God gives him. But what he said, and again, he was somebody who had people in his family who had emigrated to various parts of the world. And his take on it, and I do agree with this, that in America, if you are willing to put the head down and absolutely work and work and work and work, then you can succeed to a degree that I think is probably not matched anywhere else because of the way the system works, of the way the system rewards those kinds of things like risk taking, etc. So I do still think that is very much a part of America. But how attainable that is for most people, that's the open question.
At $7.25 an hour, you can work very, very hard and never get there, I'm afraid, Larry. And I mean, even Trump the other day saying that he refuses to increase, even contemplate improving the national minimum wage above $7.25 an hour, which is the same as 20 years ago.
Yeah,
$7.25 an hour. You can't live on it.
That's indefensible. But the many states it is higher than that. But still, given the cost of living, given it's indefensible. It's $7.25.
You talked about the civic religion of America. I'm not really. When you said that, I wrote down one word: win. For me, the civic religion of America inculcates the idea of win or lose. So the spirit of American entrepreneurialism, the spirit of American, gold frontierism, is to win, to grab, to get, to succeed, to climb, to claw, to win. But for every winner, there's a loser. And to win, it's binary. There must be losers. And so eventually you have a situation where, as you kind of alluded to, the inequality gets grosser. The Jeff Bezoses of the world get richer and pay less tax, and there are more and more millions and millions of people who are left with nothing. And that's the kind of end game of extreme capitalism, unfettered capitalism.
Yeah, I'm afraid that's right. And the American model has always, the dirty little secret was that yes, we're going to have winners, but they're also going to be losers too. And people have to be comfortable with, to however they can define it, comfortable with that reality. And the problem is that in the older days, the number of winners, as you say, used to be the vast majority. Most people did okay. Most people did fine. But for a range of different reasons, the number of losers has grown immeasurably. And a lot of it is down to the rise of technology and globalization. And at the same time, what I would view is, on behalf of speaking as a Democrat, some of the policies that my party acquiesced to, for instance, especially on the issue of trade and on the issue of American jobs, and particularly the North American Free Trade Agreement, which Bill Clinton favored, and which, of course, jobs were moving to other parts of the world where they could pay lower salaries, etc. But the North American Free Trade Agreement incentivized companies to move those jobs away. And what you had, not to be overly glib about it, was the guy and the girl who were making $20 an hour working in a factory with health care benefits. Now all of a sudden they were reduced to making $10 an hour at Walmart with no health care, and that really so totally exacerbated the issues and the problems. And at the same time, there hasn't been enough of an effort to retrain, et cetera, to do all sorts of things that could help those people. So there's, the number of losers, unfortunately, as a result of some of the reasons, has increased hugely. But the other point that's worth making, and it goes down to part of what the big difference is between America and Western Europe, and perhaps much of the rest of the world, is that here we have a real sense of society. And an idea that still, at one level, I think most of us would say we're not getting ahead unless we're all getting ahead. Whereas in the United States, the idea of the ruthless, rugged individual still persists. And I see that, for instance, in some of my friends and acquaintances who vote Trump, and they're people who are very close to me, and they look at it this way. They look at it through a very narrow prism. I had more money. It was better for me and better for my family. And it goes down to what you were saying earlier about win. And that's the idea is you need to win. And that's how they see things. So much attention is spent here on the Trump cult and the disciples behind Trump. Not enough attention is focused in on what I would call the ruthlessly transactional Trump voter. That is the person who looks at Donald Trump and says, I don't like him. I wouldn't let my daughter anywhere near him, but he cut my taxes. Or if religious people, he overturned Roe versus Wade. And as a result, I will support him. And they actually vastly outnumber the disciples.
Yeah. Okay. And I'll finish this. I'll just finish because we're going to move on. You're swaying this conversation into where we're ultimately going to get. But I'm going to hold you back, Larry.
Sure.
Because, you haven't got your main course yet. I'm not giving to you. Because winners and losers. And no mercy will be shown to the losers. No mercy. No mercy will be shown to healthcare. No mercy will be shown to their broken leg. No mercy will be shown to the losers. Because to lose is bad. And there is an inference. It's a Mayflower thing. You go back to the Mayflower and the WASP and the Protestants. You're poor? There's something wrong with you. You're bad. Something inside you, the core of you, is wrong. I don't know if it was your parents. I don't know if it was where you came from or where you were brung up or what pastor taught you. But he taught you the language of the devil. And that is poverty, poor, wrong, weakness. God helps the strong. I am Trump. I am strong. I am sponsored by good, right, and God. And if you're poor, well, maybe you should look into your own heart and wonder why you're poor. Because there's something wrong with your soul. There's an element in that as well, Larry, I believe.
Yeah, I think that's probably slightly overwrought, but I think that, I think that
that's what I do, Larry. I override.
I think there's an element of truth to that. That if you haven't succeeded, then it's somehow down to some sort of failing, whether that is one of pedigree or laziness or whatever the case might be. I think that there is an additional ingredient to it now. In terms of, why is it that, poor Americans are poor? And what it boils down to and what politicians have successfully exploited is, okay, to some extent it might be your fault, but to another extent, it's the fault of the immigrant. It's the fault of the person who is coming here and taking American jobs, taking what is rightfully yours. And it actually, what's been cynically exploited is it's actually not the fault of the system. It's not the fault of the United States. The American dream is as vibrant as it ever was. What it is the fault of is the fact that we take in too many people, that we have these people coming across the southern border, et cetera, denying opportunity, sucking up resources, hurting communities, et cetera, et cetera. We go on and on and on. And not only is that a successful mantra for people who are well-to-do, but increasingly an awful lot of Americans who are struggling. If you look at places like Appalachia, and another thing I often point, I don't like to point out, but I think is worth noting is we focus outside the United States. We focus in on poverty concentrated among people of color in the United States. But don't forget, there's an awful lot of white poverty in the United States as well. If you look through the Appalachian Mountain region, et cetera, and a lot of them have been now, inculcated with the messaging that the reason things are so bad are because of these immigrants who are coming in. And, whatever your failings, etc., the immigrants are the ones who are denying you opportunity, who are costing resources, who are taking American jobs from real Americans. And that has become a very live aspect of American political discourse.
Okay. And so we come to the election, and we're on the cusp of an election. I don't know if it's the most pivotal election in our lifetimes, as everybody keeps saying, because 16 was pretty pivotal and 20 was pretty pivotal. So 24 is pivotal as well, and we've yet to find out how pivotal it'll be. And we're on the cusp of the election. And I suppose some Irish people, I find myself sometimes even barking this at the radio or the television, almost in my subconscious, going, how is this race still even close? Okay, because you're going to answer that question, Larry. And that's what I want to ask you. How is this race even close in the face of everything? And I'm not going to go into it. We all know all the litany of stuff about Trump. In the face of all that is daily as well. It's daily. It's new stuff every day. He's doing new hits every day. New material every day, which goes beyond the last material. How is it even close? I know there's one obvious answer, and that is that America is a divided society and it's polarized. But try and help me with it, Larry. How is a candidate like Kamala Harris, who is not a disaster, has a brilliant smile, telegenic, and there's no point in saying that's not important because it's hugely important in America. She looks great. She was a prosecutor. She hasn't had any disasters at all in this campaign. Not at all. There's been no moment where you go, that was a disaster. She trounced him in the debate. She's a Democrat. It's a divided society. He's clearly off his marbles. She's not. They have stuck nothing on her. They have got nothing on her except that she won't answer questions. Nothing. How is it close, Larry? Tell me.
Well, we could probably have a podcast dedicated to that single question. A lot of it boils down to the things I've said to you already in terms of American society and in terms of where we are. And, both the Trump adherents, who are probably, somewhere around 20 to 25% of America, plus the ruthless transactional voters who I mentioned. And you get close to where Trump, floats around that sort of 48% mark. And that's how you get there. And those people are going to be with Trump no matter what. A couple of things to say. Trump has two political godfathers. And again, he thinks both of them are nuts. He hates both of them. But one was Ross Perot, who ran for president in 1992 and 1996, the Texas oil billionaire who sought to capitalize on some of the anger and discontent he saw in America. The other is Pat Buchanan, the right-wing commentator who also ran for president on multiple occasions, who tapped into the same thing but also gave it a right-wing, culturally conservative angle as well. The two of them are Trump's political godfathers. They saw the stuff I've been talking about in America, but neither one of them was able to get it over the line. Trump, in a way, wetted their messaging and then added to it celebrity. And don't forget how America is a celebrity culture. And perhaps the strongest thing that Trump did in terms of building profile, in terms of getting to where he is, was he was the host of The Apprentice and became a major name in that regard. So all of that stuff leads to a very potent political juggernaut, Trump and Trumpism. And his, the one thing he believes is that the United States gets a raw deal on the world stage. That's the one thing he has always believed. That really works with America. His simple slogans, make America great again, America first, these are politically brilliant. And so you have Trump, and he's a very, very strong guy because of all the reasons I've said, because the American model is broken, because people are hurting, and because for a lot of people, Trump, they agree with Trump when it comes down to it on the core issues. Now, you mentioned, why is this so close? And you pointed to Harris. And, look, a lot of my Democrat friends, and again, I'm a Democrat, they get angry with me for telling the truth as I see it. Everything you've said is true, that she hasn't done anything majorly wrong. But the problem is this. She's just not a strong candidate. She is just not a strong candidate. And I think this comes through her answers to questions are terrible. The reality is, as David Axelrod, Obama's chief strategist, said, it's word salad after word salad after word salad. Even the most simple of questions she appears to struggle with. And she has good answers. There are good answers out there for her on, for instance, immigration and inflation, which are the two biggest issues facing America. The reality is that inflation has slowed to less than 3%. Do we ever hear her say that? Do we ever hear her out front leading with that? No, we don't. Immigration, presentations on the border are way, way down. Does she lead with that ever? No, we don't. Instead, we get these answers that all come back to Trump is awful, Trump is the worst, etc. And she doesn't give people a reason to vote for her. And this is where I'm afraid, because I like Joe Biden, I still have respect for him. This is where, if this election is lost, a lot of fingers are going to be pointed at Joe Biden for hanging on as long as he did. Because if you look, for instance, at the two people who, in my view, would have been the strongest Democratic contenders, Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, California Governor Gavin Newsom, they are infinitely better political candidates than Kamala Harris. And I will put it to you this way. I'm hesitant to say things for sure in politics, but if there were an open nomination process, I would just about guarantee you that Harris would not have come through, that it would have been either Newsom or Whitmer, and they would be better poised to go up against Trump. And again, whether we like it or not, Trump and Trumpism, given the moment we're at in America, is a political juggernaut. And you need to send your best to take that on. And I'm afraid that Harris, you mentioned her strengths. I feel bad in a way. She's held to a higher standard than Trump. That's grossly unfair. There are elements of racism, elements of, sexism.
Misogyny,
all that stuff is in the air. But what I tell people, and, people who've attacked me from the left in particular on this one, is that we live in the world as it is, not in the world as we wish it would be. And given all of that, that would be my assessment as to why this thing is still neck and neck.
Yeah, I think your argument is good and well made. I think it's good. I hear you. Guardrails. One of the reasons he said he would do things the last time and didn't do them is because there were sensible people around him who were able to stop him from doing those crazy things. We're not talking just about bad things. We're talking about, frankly, downright weird things. Trying to sell Puerto Rico. Trying to buy Greenland. For fuck's sake. Okay? This is the President of the United States.
Yeah.
Okay? And I wrote down guardrails. And I have one thing in my mind. The man is unapologetically vengeful. He is a vengeful person. He looks for revenge. One of Trump's big things in his whole life is, I'm going to get him. I'm going to get that guy. He screwed me over. I'm going to get him. Trump, if you listen to anybody talking about him for 40 years, he's vengeful. And without any guardrails, there's nothing going to stop him from seeking revenge against all sorts of people, whether it's the networks, whether it's political opponents, or whether it's journalists.
Yeah, no, that's why, Trump, in my view, represents a danger. And I think that, a second term totally unencumbered by political constraints or electoral constraints. And this time, as you say, constrained when he went into office in 2017 by experts, by people who've been around, who know the system, who still would have been willing to take positions in the administration because they thought that maybe Trump wasn't going to be as radical as he had said. Now, this time around, there are no one really serious is going to take a position in his administration. He is instead going to be surrounded by people whose only qualification for the job will be that they will say yes and obey his orders no matter what. That is deeply, deeply frightening. And I think that is part of a powerful closing argument that Harris and Tim Walz can make. I think, again, Democrats sometimes have a tendency to over-egg things because they start tossing on the fascist label, the Hitler label, etc. I think that's unnecessary because I think it has the capacity to alienate some Trump voters. Some people whose votes are up for grabs, which I think is a stupid strategy. Whereas they have so much to work with just from what he's said and done that there's plenty to go with on that front. Now, the other question, in terms of constraints on Trump, And we don't talk often enough about Congress and who will have control of the two houses of Congress, because obviously they can exert a considerable lever of power in the United States and stop him from doing things he might otherwise like to do. So watching which way those two are going to go. I mean, seems likely Republicans will take control of the Senate, probably by a whisker, not by much, but that the House is really up for grabs. That's another thing. And then the other troubling question for a lot of people is the composition of the United States Supreme Court, and again comprised of Trump appointees and a conservative majority, and the extent to which they will exercise a brake on some of his more authoritarian instincts, which is in the minds of lots of people an open question. And again, we don't want to be talking about apocalyptic scenarios here, but I wouldn't be one of the apocalyptic wing, because I still have enough faith in the institutions of the United States, up to and including the United States military, that I would have enough faith that some of Trump's more crazy ideas won't come to pass and crazy instincts won't come to pass. But that having been said, is it a danger? Does it represent a threat not only to the United States but to the world? Yeah, I think it does.
One of the slags of the Republican side against Democrats is that they're preachy and they're touchy and they're sensitive. They're overly sensitive and they can't take a joke. I was just joking when I said that extremely racist thing. Yeah. I was just joking. The Democrats can't take a joke. Wouldn't it be ironic if the thing that tipped the swing state of Pennsylvania over the edge were the 480,000 Puerto Ricans who live there, and that they changed their mind because of the disgusting, tasteless joke that comedian made at the Madison Square Garden about Puerto Rico being an island of floating garbage?
Yeah, absolutely. I people have been asking me, do I think this could make a difference? And I actually do think it could make a difference. In a race that is as close as this one, something like that can make a difference. And you have to consider in the light that Trump's numbers with Latinos are very, very good. And the Puerto Ricans are a vital cog in that wheel. One of the things that's been said to me is you won't find a more macho culture in the world than Puerto Ricans. Yeah. And an awful lot of them really, really like Donald Trump. And what that comedian said, and of course we've seen the likes of Jon Stewart, for instance, saying like, this is comedy, and if you don't like it, then, this guy just makes fun of everybody. But in the context of an election, I think the comments made were really deeply, deeply, deeply offensive and transparently racist. And I know comedy can be all sorts of things. I don't know, who am I telling? But comedy can be all sorts of things. But I think in the context of this election, I think it was awful. I think it was awful for the Trump team. I'd go so far as to say Trump always says he could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and get away with it. He might shoot this comedian and benefit benefit as a result. So yeah, I think that if this is really close, if Pennsylvania goes by a whisker for Harris, we could look at this event in Madison Square Garden and say, that's where it was lost. Because what I'm reading from a lot of Latinos is that we were in Trump's direction. We like an awful lot of what he says, but that was just racist. And, they're wondering, do we want to have common cause with some of the people who vote for Trump who are unbridled racists? And if that even moves a small segment of them, it could be dispositive. Even
20 or 30,000 of the 480,000, if it moved them, that's 20,000 in your column, which is not in his column. That's minus 40 then. Yeah. It's extraordinary.
And if you look at the last election, which again, from an electoral college point of view, looked like an actual comfortable Biden victory. If you look at it another way, the thing was only decided by 60,000 votes. You can do the maths, and that's how it works out. Yeah. So in that context, something like this is a colossal misstep, and it is a mystery to me why Trump hasn't been shouting from the rooftops that comedian is a jerk, et cetera, et cetera. And Trump knows how to skewer somebody.
Trump's immediate things, I never heard of him. I didn't even know he was there.
Yeah.
I
think he should be a lot more aggressive than that. I think he should totally, and I think he should have Puerto Ricans up on stage with him. All the things he does very well. That's what he should be at.
Yeah, or that picture of him with a Portuguese or Puerto Rican porn star. Let's just drag that one out, Surely that's there. Now, there's a personal question then to you, Larry. In my life, it's a big night for me, this election, because for no other reason than I care. It's such an important country. It's such an important event. And I'm kind of weighing up, I'll be at work, and I'm kind of weighing up, am I going to pull an all-nighter here? But I'm not Larry Donnelly. What's Larry Donnelly going to do?
I'm going to be in RTE from 9:30 in the evening until 3:30 in the morning.
Oh, is that right?
And then I'll be back in for Morning Island at 6 a.m.
Yeah,
so it is going
sleep on the couch?
Yes.
In RTE almost?
Yes, and take a quick shower. And
will they? Because you can't return home.
No, I won't. No, so I'll just be taking...
They'll have to offer you a shower and a couch.
I'll take a quick shower.
And a blanket.
I'll take a quick shower and be bright-eyed and bushy-tailed for Morning Island, and then keep going through the day depending on how it would go. It's an every 4-year thing, and it's tough, but Mario, the fact is, I love it. The description pig and shit wouldn't be too far off the mark. I absolutely love it.
I know, same here. I love it as well. But again, I'm not Larry Donnelly. And just one final thing second final thing actually, about America's the greatest country in the world. The only place where you have free and fair elections. Free and fair elections, where South Dakota and North Dakota have the same amount of Senate seats as California and New York. Do you know what I mean? I mean, for God's sake, in the Electoral College, could you think of something more undemocratic than the Electoral College?
Well, you've opened up a can of worms now, Mario, and here I'm going to have to push back on you in a big way. I am still a supporter of the Electoral College system. I don't think it's at all desirable that somebody can win the popular vote and be elected president. I think that's a very unfortunate outcome. Thankfully, it's only happened a handful of times in American history. But here's what I would say to you, and it comes down to what the United States is. And I always tell Irish people the United States is far more analogous to the European Union than it is to any single member state of the European Union.
Say that again? Sorry.
The United States as an entity is far more analogous to the European Union than it is to any single member state of the European Union in terms of how diverse we are culturally across the board. And what I would say is I guarantee that growing up in Boston, I would have had more in common with you than I would have with somebody in rural Idaho. Yeah. So we are of that vast a scale. And we are, 50 states, but we're actually, in a way, we're 50 countries. And I don't think that people in Ireland would like it if the European Union was governed on a raw majoritarian basis. Yes. And if you think we have a divided society in the United States now, imagine one in which so-called flyover country was denuded of its say in elections. Then you'd be talking about serious division up to and including secession movements, which wouldn't succeed, but would be there. The last point I'd make in defense of the Electoral College is that it's not the Electoral College system. It's not the system that's broken, not the electoral system that's broken. It's the political system that's broken. People say, how come it comes down to 7 states? Isn't that ridiculous when you have a state of 50 states, etc.? Well, that's not an Electoral College system failing. The reality is, not so long ago, just about every state was a battleground state. Jimmy Carter won throughout the United States South in 1976.
Florida used to be a battle state until very recently.
Absolutely, Democratic state. Ronald Reagan won my home state of Massachusetts twice. Okay, the idea of that happening now is just unthinkable. That is not a failing of the Electoral College. That is a failing of the political system in which both parties have gone way to the polls, largely at the behest of money. So if political parties nominated people who were more to the center, who could appeal to more voters, then I don't think there'd be any complaints really about the Electoral College system. But again, it's not a systemic failing. It's a failure of the political system, largely because of money.
I think your comparison between the European Union is well taken. That's good. And that educated me. I didn't think of it that way before. That's good. But you've thought about these things a lot. All right. So are you into predictions? And I know I suppose it keeps moving. Have you been of a firm thought in the last couple of weeks, or do you keep changing, or are you in a constant state of not knowing?
I'll put it this way. A month ago, I said to a number of media outlets, I said that I thought that Harris was in stronger position a month ago. Up until this weekend, my view was that Trump was in slightly better position. I don't want to put too much emphasis on one single event in terms of the rally in Madison Square Garden, but it has made me wobble a little bit, as have a couple of things that I'm hearing about Democrat get out the vote operations, etc.
Being good.
Yeah. They're not. It hasn't been blown through as much as Democrats would like in the early voting, but still on the day, I think that their operation is a superior one to the Republicans. So look, I think that this is on a knife edge, and as I say, I think there are three scenarios. Either this thing goes on for days, or it breaks narrowly and decisively for Harris, or narrowly but decisively for Trump. And again, to speak against myself, Democrats do have a reputation for being bedwetters, and one of the things I'm hearing from Democrats in Boston who are networked around the country is that they are deeply, deeply nervous. So,
but maybe that will get out the vote.
Maybe that will get out the vote, but they're deeply nervous. And they, for instance, the one thing I was told that would be disconcerting from a Democratic point of view is that Senators Sherrod Brown and Senator Bob Casey from Ohio and Pennsylvania, respectively, have reportedly told the Harris people to stay well away from them, not even to say their names. And Bob Casey, indeed, in Pennsylvania, is running a television ad in which he is trumpeting how many times he voted with Donald Trump when he was president. So, look, there are signs that augur in both directions. I think the bottom line is it's too close to call.
Larry Pig in Shit Donnelly, thank you very much, and I hope the blanket in RTE is warm, and I hope Miriam, whoever is interviewing you, is nice to you. Who is it? Is it going to be?
I'm not so sure yet, but I'm sure it'll be interesting anyway.
Yeah. Okay. Enjoy the election, and I hope, listen, it's peaceful at least.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thanks, Larry.
Cheers.
And that's it from the Mario Rosenstock podcast this week. My thanks to Larry Donnelly. My thanks to you, as always, for listening and for getting in touch. It's mariorosenstock@gmail.com if you want to get in touch personally with me, and I read them all and I get back to most of them. And, of course, my thanks to our new sponsor for being back all this season. OnIce.ie, Ireland's premier ice skating experience. Have a go with it, folks. It's great fun. Ice skating nationwide. They're bringing back the magic of ice skating nationwide. They're in Dublin, Cork, Limerick, Galway and Waterford. In Dublin, they're in Dundrum and Swords. Grab your tickets now at onice.ie. It's festive fun for all the family. Huge entertainment. This is the perfect season to try it. Go out there and give it a bash. So thanks to everybody at On Ice for getting involved with the Mario Rosenstock podcast. And we're delighted that you've come on board to join us. Okay, that's it for this week's, folks. See you same time, same place next week. Bye.
The Mario Rosenstock Podcast with On Ice, Ireland's premium ice skating experience, where winter memories are made. Visit onice.ie.
GoLoud. Sounds better with us.